Sign the contract, sister. It's the only way.
This is betrayal. How could you? Oh, come on now.
Just sign it, Ma. Please, done. Sign. Sign the contract. Now.
If you don't, we'll have a judge declare you mentally unfit.
No, but please, I can't.
Sign it.
The final letter.
Ha! More empty promises.
What does it say? This is the final warning. If you sign this contract, you will lose everything. Your family's legacy will be destroyed.
My brother slid the contract across Dad's old dining table and tapped the signature line. My sister laughed beside him, while my own son leaned back as if my surrender were already guaranteed. "Stop making this difficult," Mom Mark said. "Sign it, and we can finally sell the lodge." When I refused, Richard locked the dining room door. Then Claire warned that if I did not cooperate, they would ask a judge to declare me mentally unfit. Their laughter grew louder when I reached into my purse and placed Dad's sealed envelope on the table. "A dead man's letter won't save you," Richard said. I broke the seal and read the first line aloud. "If they have cornered you together, Evelyn, then everything I feared has begun." The room went silent. Before I tell you what my father knew, please like this video and subscribe. If you believe no one should be bullied by their own family, tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place and where you are watching from and what time it is there. Sometimes, knowing someone is listening makes a painful truth easier to share. 6 weeks before that dinner, Carter Ridge Lodge still felt like my father's home. It sat high in the Blue Ridge Mountains outside Asheville, North Carolina, surrounded by pine trees, stone paths, and long wooden porches that looked out over miles of misty hills. In autumn, visitors came for the red and gold leaves. In winter, families gathered around the lobby fireplace. But to me, it was never just a business. It was where my father had taught me to ride a bicycle, where my mother had baked apple pies for guests, and where every floorboard seemed to remember a voice I had lost. For nearly 3 years, I lived in the room across the hall from Dad. After his stroke, he could still walk short distances with a cane, but simple tasks exhausted him. His right hand shook when he lifted a coffee cup. Some mornings, he needed help fastening the buttons on his shirt. He hated that more than anything. "I built 3 guest cabins with these hands," he once said, staring down at his trembling fingers. "Now they won't even cooperate with a button." I took his hand and smiled. "Then, let me handle the buttons. You can still tell everyone where the cabin should go." He laughed, but his eyes filled with tears. That was how most of our days passed, small jokes wrapped around quiet grief. I had retired early from my job as a school counselor, so I could care for him. At first, I told myself it would only be for a few months. But months became years. I learned his medication schedule, his physical therapy exercises, the foods that were easiest for him to swallow, and the exact way he liked his pillows arranged at night. I did not regret staying. What hurt was how easily everyone else decided that my time belonged to him. My younger brother Richard visited when there was a financial meeting or an important vendor at the lodge. He arrived in polished shoes, carrying folders and speaking quickly about occupancy rates, maintenance costs, and expansion plans. He always seemed irritated when Dad needed a break. "We can't keep postponing decisions," Richard would say. Dad would look at him with tired eyes. A decision made too quickly is usually made for the wrong person. Richard never liked that answer. My sister Linda called 2 or 3 times a week usually, while driving somewhere. She would ask how Dad was, but before I finished answering, she would begin telling me about her own problems, her condo repairs, her church committee, her daughter's divorce. "I wish I could come more often," she always said, but she rarely did. My son Mark lived less than 2 hours away in Charlotte. He came with his wife Claire on holidays and occasionally brought my grandchildren for the weekend. He would hug his grandfather, take a few photographs, and promise to return soon. Then months would pass. I told myself he was busy. He worked in real estate. Claire had a demanding schedule. The children had school and sports. I made excuses because mothers often do that. We protect our children from judgment, even when the judgment is our own. Dad noticed more than I wanted him to. One evening, after Mark canceled another visit, I found Dad sitting by the window in his study. The mountains outside were hidden beneath heavy rain. "He should be here," Dad said. "He has work." "You always say that." "Because it's true." Dad turned toward me. "No, Evelyn. You say it because the truth hurts you." I busied myself straightening a stack of magazines. "I'm fine. You have been saying that since you were 12. I looked at him then, and for a moment, he was not an old man recovering from a stroke. He was the father who had always known when I was hiding pain. "I don't want Mark to feel guilty," I whispered. "Guilt is not always cruelty," Dad said. "Sometimes it is the part of us that still knows right from wrong." I did not answer. Around that same time, Dad began speaking about numbers. At first, his comments seemed random. "Did Richard show you the roof invoice?" "No," I said. "Why would he?" "Because the roof did not cost what he said it cost." Another afternoon, Dad asked whether I had seen the monthly account statements. "I don't handle the business side. That may have been my mistake." He tried to explain more, but his words became slow and strained whenever he was tired. The stroke had left him with moments when his thoughts moved faster than his speech. "Money going out," he said once, tapping the desk. "Too much. Same names, different papers." I leaned closer. "What names?" He closed his eyes in frustration. "Richard knows." I believed he meant Richard knew how to explain the expenses. I did not yet understand that Dad was trying to warn me about him. One cold evening in early March, I helped Dad into bed after dinner. He seemed weaker than usual. His breathing was shallow, and he had barely touched his soup. I asked whether I should call the doctor. "No hospital," he said firmly. "Dad, no. Sit down." I sat beside him. For a while, he stared at the framed photograph on his nightstand. It showed my mother, Margaret, standing on the lodge porch nearly 30 years earlier. She wore a blue dress and held a basket of wildflowers. Dad had kept that photograph beside him since the day she died. "You look like her when you're worried," he said. "I'm always worried lately." "That is because I left too much on your shoulders. You didn't leave it there. I chose to stay, and the others chose not to." His voice carried no anger. That made the words sadder. He reached beneath the blanket and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. My name was written across the front in his uneven handwriting. "Evelyn." The flap was sealed with dark red wax. I tried to take it, but he held on. "You must promise me something." "All right. Do not open this because I die." The bluntness of his words frightened me. "Please don't talk like that. Listen." His grip tightened with surprising strength. "Do not open it because Richard frightens you. Do not open it because Linda cries. Do not open it because Mark asks you for help." My stomach tightened when he said my son's name. When they are all together," he said, "when they put papers in front of you and tell you that signing is the only way to save the family." I stared at him. "What papers? Anything involving this lodge? The land, the business, your authority." "My authority, Dad." "I don't have any authority." His eyes held mine. "You have more than they think." I waited for him to explain, but his strength was fading. His fingers loosened around the envelope. "Dad, what did you find?" "The numbers don't match. You already told me that." "Not mistakes," he whispered. "A plan." A chill moved through me. "What kind of plan?" He glanced toward the closed bedroom door as though someone might be listening in the hallway. "Richard moved money. Others helped. I needed proof." "Who helped him?" His mouth opened, but no answer came. He closed his eyes, breathing hard. I reached for the telephone. "Stop." His voice was faint but firm. "The lawyer knows enough." "Nathan." He nodded. "Call him after you open the letter." "Not before." I felt confused and frightened, but I promised. He finally released the envelope. I placed it inside the locked drawer of my bedside table. I remember touching the wax seal and wondering whether grief had made Dad suspicious. He had always been careful with money, but in recent months, he sometimes repeated questions or misplaced papers. I wanted to believe that age and illness had created fears that were not real. That belief was easier than imagining my own family plotting behind his back. The next morning, I woke before sunrise and went to check on him. His room was quiet, too quiet. Dad was lying on his back, one hand resting over his chest. His face looked peaceful, almost younger. I touched his shoulder and said his name. He did not move. I called the paramedics, though some part of me already knew. Walter Carter had died in his sleep at 88 years old. As the morning light spread across the mountains, I sat beside his bed, holding his cold hand. My grief was so complete that I forgot the envelope for several hours. Then I remembered his warning. Do not open it because I die. So I did not. I kept my promise even while the rest of the family began arriving at the lodge. Even when Richard went directly to Dad's study before coming upstairs. Even when Linda asked where the estate papers were. Even when Mark stood in the hallway speaking quietly to Claire about how quickly the property could be sold. I told myself I was hearing ordinary questions from frightened, grieving people. But inside my locked drawer, Dad's final letter waited, and the seal remained unbroken. Dad's funeral was held 6 days later at Grace Hill Methodist Church, the same small stone building where my parents had married and where my mother's memorial service had taken place 21 years earlier. The morning was cold and clear. Sunlight shone through the stained glass windows and painted soft colors across Dad's closed casket. Nearly every seat was filled. Former employees from Carter Ridge Lodge came wearing dark suits and simple dresses. Neighbors brought casseroles to the fellowship hall. Men who had worked beside Dad 40 years earlier stood in the back with their hats pressed against their chests. People kept telling me how fortunate Dad had been to have me. You gave him 3 more good years, Mrs. Henderson whispered as she hugged me. You were such a devoted daughter, another woman said. I thanked them because I did not know what else to say. Their kindness made the emptiness beside me more noticeable. Richard sat in the front pew with his wife looking polished and composed. Linda wept loudly into a lace handkerchief, though she had spent most of the morning complaining that the funeral flowers were not arranged properly. Mark and Claire arrived 10 minutes before the service began. Mark kissed my cheek and said he had been caught in traffic. I wanted to ask why he had not called me once since the morning Dad died. Instead, I squeezed his hand. During the service, Reverend Collins spoke about Dad's patience, generosity, and devotion to the lodge. He told a story about a winter storm years earlier when Dad had opened every guest room to stranded travelers without asking for payment. I looked at the casket and remembered Dad sitting at the kitchen table afterward, laughing because Mother had warned him that generosity would bankrupt us. Then we'll be poor with a full house, he had said. That memory nearly broke me. I lowered my head and cried quietly. When the service ended, people formed a line to offer condolences. I stood beside the casket, while Richard accepted handshakes as though he were already the head of the family. Then I heard him speaking to Nathan Reed near the church entrance. Nathan had been Dad's attorney for more than 30 years. He was 71, tall and silver-haired, with a calm face that revealed little. He had attended birthdays, anniversaries, and more family dinners than I could count. Richard leaned toward him. When are we reading the will? Nathan glanced toward me before answering. The estate process will begin when the required documents are complete. That could mean anything. It means there are procedures, Richard. We need access to the operating accounts immediately. Vendors are waiting. The lodge has an established business account. Dad was the authorized owner. Nathan's expression remained neutral. Your father's death does not give you automatic control. Richard's jaw tightened. This family cannot wait for Evelyn to finish grieving. I felt those words like a slap. Dad had not yet been buried, and Richard was already treating my grief as an inconvenience. Before I could approach them, Claire appeared beside Dad's former office manager, Susan Bell. Claire was asking whether anyone had found the keys to Dad's study cabinets. Susan looked uncomfortable. Mr. Carter kept his personal files private. "We're family," Claire said. "That does not make the files yours." Claire smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Later at the cemetery, Mark stood beside me while Dad's casket was lowered into the ground. For a few seconds, he looked like the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. His eyes were red and his shoulders sagged. I reached for him. He hugged me tightly. "I'm sorry, Mom." I thought he meant he was sorry that Dad had died. Then he whispered, "We should sell the lodge before it becomes a burden." I pulled away. "What?" "It's a huge property. The maintenance alone must be overwhelming. We are standing beside your grandfather's grave. I'm only saying we need to think realistically." "We, everyone." The words settled between us. Behind him, Claire was watching. I turned back toward the grave and said nothing more. The preliminary reading of Dad's will took place 4 days later in Nathan's office in downtown Asheville. The room smelled of old books and coffee. I sat at one end of a long conference table. Richard and his wife sat opposite me. Linda arrived wearing oversized sunglasses, though we were indoors. Mark and Claire sat together, their fingers occasionally touching beneath the table. Nathan entered carrying several folders. "I want to be clear," he began. "This is a preliminary review. Walter's estate includes assets governed by separate legal instruments. Those matters require additional verification." Richard leaned back impatiently. "Just tell us what he left." Nathan read the personal bequests first. Dad left Linda $75,000 and several pieces of Mother's jewelry. Richard was left $100,000 along with Dad's collection of antique tools. Mark received $50,000 and Dad's restored 1967 Ford truck. I was left Dad's personal books, Mother's piano, and the right to remain in my room at Carter Ridge Lodge during the administration of the estate. Richard gave a small laugh. "It seems Dad understood who actually managed the business." Nathan looked at him. "I have not discussed the lodge." The room became still. Nathan opened another folder. "Carter Ridge Lodge and the land connected to it are not distributed through Walter Carter's individual will." Richard frowned. "What does that mean?" "The controlling interest is held by a private family trust." Linda removed her sunglasses. "What trust?" "At this time, I am not authorized to disclose the full terms." Richard planted both hands on the table. "I have managed the lodge finances for 8 years. That is not the same as ownership." "Who is the trustee?" "The trust documents require a financial review before succession can be confirmed." Claire leaned forward. "How long will that take?" "As long as necessary." Richard's face darkened. "This is ridiculous. Evelyn has been living with Dad for years. She had access to him every day. How do we know she didn't convince him to change something?" My breath caught. Linda looked down at the table. Mark did not defend me. Nathan's voice hardened. "Be careful, Richard. I'm asking a legitimate question." Dad was old. He had a stroke. Evelyn controlled his medication, his appointments, his visitors. "I cared for him," I said. Richard turned toward me. "And perhaps you made sure he rewarded you." I felt every person in the room waiting for my answer. I never asked Dad for anything. "That's convenient." Nathan closed the folder sharply. "This meeting is over." Richard stood. "No. We have employees, contracts, and property taxes. Someone must be in charge. The existing administrative structure will remain until the review is complete. And Evelyn has no obligation to answer your accusations." Richard gathered his papers. "This family deserves transparency." The hypocrisy nearly made me laugh. Instead, I stared at Mark. He avoided my eyes. Outside Nathan's office, he finally caught up with me near the elevator. "Mom, don't take Uncle Richard personally. He accused me of manipulating a dying man. He's under pressure, and you said nothing." Mark rubbed the back of his neck. "I didn't want to make things worse. You made a choice." The elevator doors opened. Before stepping inside, I asked him one question. "Do you believe I influenced Grandpa?" His silence lasted only a second, but sometimes 1 second is enough to change how a mother sees her child. "I don't know what to believe," he said. The doors closed between us. That evening, I returned to Carter Ridge Lodge alone. Dad's chair still sat beside the fireplace. His reading glasses rested on the side table where he had left them. I sank into the chair across from his and listened to the silence. For the first time, I understood that my family did not see me as the daughter who had cared for him. They saw me as an obstacle between them and something they believed they deserved. Upstairs, Dad's sealed envelope remained locked in my drawer. I touched the key hanging around my neck. I still did not open it. They had not yet placed papers in front of me, but Dad's warning no longer seemed like the fear of a confused old man. It felt like a clock had started ticking. 3 days after the meeting at Nathan's office, Richard began acting as though Carter Ridge Lodge already belonged to him. I learned about it from Susan Bell. She called me just after 7 in the morning while I was making coffee in the lodge kitchen. "Evelyn, are you aware that Richard has ordered the locks changed on your father's office?" I set the coffee pot down. "No." He arrived with a locksmith before sunrise. I walked quickly through the quiet lobby. Outside Dad's office, Richard stood with 2 maintenance workers while a stranger replaced the brass lock on the door. "What are you doing?" I asked. Richard did not look surprised to see me. "Securing company records. You do not have the authority to change these locks. I have managed the finances for years." Nathan said the current structure would remain. "The current structure is failing. Someone needs to take responsibility." Susan stood several feet away holding a clipboard. Her face was pale with anger. "You told the staff that all department heads must report directly to you," she said. "That is correct. You are not the general manager?" Richard smiled. "Not yet." I stepped between him and the office door. "Give me the new key." "No." This was Dad's private office. "Dad is gone, Evelyn." The cruelty in his voice was casual, almost bored. Before I could respond, Linda came down the hallway carrying 2 suitcases. She wore a soft cream sweater and looked as though she were arriving for a relaxing weekend. "What are those?" I asked. "My things." "Why? Someone needs to help organize Dad's belongings." "I have already started." Linda gave me a sympathetic smile. "You're too emotionally attached. It would be healthier if someone more objective handled it." "More objective, you know what I mean." Unfortunately, I did. By noon, Linda had moved into one of the lodge's best guest suites. She ordered housekeeping to remove the previous occupant's luggage and told the kitchen staff to prepare meals according to her diet. She did not help me organize Dad's belongings. Instead, she spent hours photographing furniture paintings and silverware, sending the images to someone on her phone. When I asked what she was doing, she said she was creating an inventory. 2 days later, I discovered men walking across the North Meadow with surveying equipment. The meadow was one of the most beautiful parts of Carter Ridge. In spring, wildflowers covered the hillside. Dad had refused every suggestion to build additional cabins there. I approached the men. "Who authorized this survey?" One of them handed me a business card. "We were hired by Harlow Development Group." I recognized the name. It was a large company based in Atlanta that built luxury resorts and private communities. "There must be a mistake. This property is not for sale." The man looked at his paperwork. "We were told the family is preparing for a transaction." Claire appeared near the stone path, dressed in a fitted black coat and high boots. "There you are," she said to the surveyors. "The southern boundary begins beyond the tree line." I stared at her. "You arranged this. We are gathering information?" "For a sale for planning purposes?" Nathan specifically said ownership had not been determined. Claire's expression hardened. "Nathan is an elderly family attorney who moves at the speed of paper. Harlow is prepared to make a serious offer, but opportunities do not remain open forever. You have no right to invite buyers here. Neither do you have the right to block the family's future, because you are sentimental about a building. It is not just a building. To you." That was the moment I understood Claire had never seen Carter Ridge as a family home. She saw acreage development potential and commission. That afternoon, I found cardboard boxes stacked outside Dad's room. His shirts had been removed from the closet. His photographs, cufflinks, letters, and watches had been thrown together without care. Linda was kneeling beside an open box containing Mother's belongings. "What are you doing?" She held up a pearl bracelet. "Dad left me some of Mother's jewelry. The estate has not been distributed. It will be mine. Put it back." Linda sighed. "Evelyn, this is exactly why Richard thinks you are becoming unreasonable. Because I do not want you taking things before Nathan approves it. Because you act as though you are the only person who loved Dad. I never said that. You don't have to." I took the bracelet gently from her hand and returned it to the velvet case. "These items stay here until the estate is settled." Linda stood. "You always needed to be the good daughter." The words surprised me. "What does that mean?" "It means you stayed here cooked. His meals took him to doctors and made the rest of us look selfish. I did not force any of you to stay away. No, you just made sure everyone knew you were the one making sacrifices." I stared at my sister. For 3 years, I had rarely complained. I had canceled vacations, missed birthdays, and spent nights sleeping in a chair beside Dad's bed. I had never asked Linda for money or demanded that she take my place. Yet somehow my care had become an accusation against her. Before I could answer, Susan appeared in the doorway. "Evelyn, I need you downstairs." In the lobby, 2 employees were packing their belongings. One was Henry Dawson, the maintenance supervisor who had worked at Carter Ridge for 27 years. The other was Maria Lewis, the lodge's bookkeeper. "What happened?" I asked. Henry looked at Richard, who stood near the front desk. "We were dismissed." "Why?" Richard answered. "Restructuring." Maria clutched a cardboard box against her chest. "He asked me to give him the original vendor ledgers. I said they were part of an active audit and could not be removed." Richard's face remained calm. "She refused a direct instruction. She followed procedures," Susan said. "I am changing the procedure." "You cannot fire longtime employees without approval," I told him. Richard stepped close enough that only I could hear his next words. "You are confusing residents with authority." I looked into his eyes. "And you are confusing access with ownership." For one brief second, anger cracked through his composure. Then he smiled. "Perhaps you should go home. I am home." "No. You have a house in Asheville. This lodge is a business, not a retirement community for women who cannot let go." The lobby went silent. Maria's eyes filled with tears on my behalf. Richard continued. "You need rest. Linda can oversee Dad's personal things. I will handle operations. Mark can help prepare the real estate side." So, this was planned. "What was? All of you already have roles?" He shrugged. "We are being practical." I turned to Henry and Maria. "Do not destroy or surrender any records. Nathan will contact you." Richard laughed. "Nathan does not run the lodge, neither do you." I left before he could see my hands shaking. That evening, I drove to my small house in Asheville. I had not slept there in months. Dust covered the dining table, and the room smelled closed and unfamiliar. My suitcase stood by the door. Richard had not physically thrown me out, but the message was clear. They wanted me gone before the financial review was complete. I sat in the dark and thought about the surveyors in the meadow, Claire's secret preparations, and the missing records. Then I remembered something Dad had said several weeks before he died. People do not rush an honest transaction. At the time, I thought he was speaking generally. Now I knew he had been warning me. They were not beginning a sale because Dad had died. They had been preparing for it while he was still alive. Mark came to my house the following Sunday afternoon, carrying flowers and a paper bag from my favorite bakery. For one foolish moment, I believed my son had come to apologize. I opened the door, and he gave me the hesitant smile he had worn as a teenager whenever he had damaged something and hoped charm might protect him from consequences. "I brought lemon cake," he said. "You remembered. You always liked it. I stepped aside and let him in. My house was small compared with Carter Ridge Lodge, but it had once felt warm. I had bought it after my divorce when Mark was 14. We had painted the kitchen together, built shelves in the living room, and eaten pizza on the floor because I could not afford a dining table yet. Now he looked around as though he were visiting a stranger. I haven't been here in a long time, he said. No. He placed the flowers in the sink and began searching for a vase. I watched him open the wrong cabinet twice. When he was a child, he knew every corner of that kitchen. We sat at the dining table with coffee and slices of lemon cake. For several minutes, Mark talked about the children. My granddaughter Lily had made the honor roll. My grandson Caleb was trying out for the baseball team. I listened closely. Those were the parts of Mark's life I still recognized. Then he set down his fork. Mom, I owe you an apology. My heart softened despite everything. For what? For the way Uncle Richard spoke to you. For not saying more. Why didn't you? He stared into his coffee. I felt trapped. Between me and a property deal, between everyone. That is not an answer. He sighed. Claire and I are having financial problems. I waited. A development project fell apart last year, he continued. I invested more than I should have. Then interest rates changed. 2 buyers walked away and the lender demanded repayment. How much do you owe enough? That could mean anything. Almost $300,000. I sat back. Mark, I thought I could fix it before anyone knew. Does Claire know? She knows most of it. Most. He rubbed both hands over his face. We refinanced the house. I borrowed against my retirement account. I used money from the business. Does Claire know about that? She does now. I reached across the table. Why didn't you come to me and say what? That at 41 years old, I might lose my home because I made a terrible investment. You are my son? That's exactly why. His voice broke slightly. For a moment, I saw genuine shame. I wanted to pull him close and tell him that mistakes did not erase a lifetime. Then he said, the sale of Carter Ridge could solve everything. I withdrew my hand. So this is why you came? No. I came because I want us to understand each other. You brought cake and a sales argument. It is not just about me. The lodge needs millions in repairs. Uncle Richard says the operating accounts are nearly empty. Richard controls those accounts. He says Dad refused necessary changes. Your grandfather refused to turn the North Meadow into luxury condominiums. Maybe that was not a practical decision. It was his decision. Now he is gone. The words were quieter than Richard's had been, but they hurt more coming from Mark. He reached into the leather folder beside his chair. There is a way to avoid a long fight. He removed a document and placed it on the table. The first page was titled, Temporary Property Maintenance Authorization. What is this? It allows me to coordinate repairs inspections and vendor agreements while Nathan finishes the trust review. Why would I need to authorize that? Because you are living at the lodge and may have temporary occupancy rights. Harlow's attorneys want all potential parties to acknowledge access. You said this was about maintenance. It is. I began reading. Mark spoke while I scanned the pages. It does not sell anything. It just keeps the process moving. If the roof needs work, if surveyors require access, if a contractor needs approval, I can handle it. Why would Harlow's attorneys be involved in maintenance? He hesitated. They may finance some improvements as part of a future agreement. I continued reading slowly. Years of counseling students and reviewing school documents had taught me that the most dangerous words were often buried beneath harmless headings. On page 6, I found a paragraph written in dense legal language. By signing, I would appoint Mark as my authorized representative in all negotiations, contracts, transfers, and dispositions involving any present or future interest I might hold in Carter Ridge Lodge. I read it twice. Then I looked up. This gives you power of attorney over my interest in the property. His face changed. only for lodge-related matters. It allows you to sign contracts in my name, temporary contracts. It does not say temporary. The attorney explained that it could be revoked after you sign a sale. That is not what this is. I pushed the document toward him. Then why did you describe it as permission for repairs? Because I knew you would panic if I used legal language. You lied because you thought the truth would make me say no. His voice rose. I am trying to save my family by taking authority from your mother, by preventing you from destroying a solution because of your grief. The room became painfully still. Do you hear yourself? I asked. He stood and walked toward the window. All my life you put this family before yourself. Now everyone needs you, and suddenly you are suspicious of everything. I am suspicious because my brother changed locks. Your wife brought surveyors onto the land, and you just tried to trick me into signing away my rights. I did not trick you. What would you call it? He turned around, helping you make the right decision. For whom? For all of us. His fist struck the windowsill. I had rarely seen Mark angry. Even as a teenager, he had withdrawn rather than shouted. Now his face was red. You spent 3 years at Carter Ridge, he said. 3 years canceling visits, missing holidays, and telling me Grandpa needed you. He did need me. So did I. The accusation stunned me. You were 38 years old when I moved in with him. That does not mean I stopped needing a mother. You had a wife, children, a career. Dad could not button his own shirt. You always have a reason why someone else deserved more of you. I stood slowly. That is not fair. Maybe not, but it is true. No, Mark. It is convenient. His eyes narrowed. What does that mean? It means you are using an old hurt to pressure me into rescuing you from a financial mistake. His face collapsed for a second, and I almost apologized. Then he picked up the papers. You could save my house with one signature. And what would happen to mine? You have this place. This is not about where I sleep. It is always about Carter Ridge with you. No. Today it is about whether my son respects my right to understand what I sign. He shoved the document into the folder. Uncle Richard was right. You are becoming impossible. Because I read the fine print, because you think everyone is your enemy. I did not think that when you walked through the door. That stopped him. His eyes moved to the untouched flowers in the sink. For one moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said quietly, Next time the whole family will be there. What is that supposed to mean? It means we cannot keep asking politely while the buyer prepares to walk away. A coldness spread through me. So this visit was the polite version. He looked ashamed, but he did not take the words back. Mark walked to the door. I followed him. Before leaving, he turned toward me. If the deal collapses, people will lose everything, not just me. Who? He tightened his grip on the folder. You should ask Grandpa's lawyer why the accounts are empty. Then he stepped outside. I stood in the doorway as he drove away. On the dining table, one drop of coffee had stained the place where the signature line had rested. I took a photograph of every page Mark had brought before he left. I had done it quietly while he stood at the window. That evening, I enlarged the image of the final page on my computer. Below the signature line was the name of the firm that had prepared the document, Blue Heron Holdings. It was not Harlow Development Group. It was not Richard's accounting office. It was a company I had never heard of. I wrote the name on a piece of paper. Then I drove back to Carter Ridge Lodge after dark. Dad's sealed letter was still hidden in the locked drawer. I did not open it, but for the first time I began searching for the things he had left outside the envelope. I returned to Carter Ridge Lodge after 10 that night. Most of the guest room lights were dark, and the lobby fireplace had burned down to a bed of red coals. I parked behind the kitchen so Richard would not see my car from the main entrance. The employee side door still opened with my old key. Inside, the lodge felt different. It was not simply that Dad was gone. The familiar building now seemed occupied by people searching for something they did not own. I moved quietly upstairs and entered Dad's bedroom. Linda had emptied more drawers since my last visit. His clothes were gone, and several photographs had been removed from the dresser. The framed picture of Mother in her blue dress was still beside the bed, perhaps, because no one believed it had financial value. I picked it up. "What were you trying to tell me?" I whispered. Dad had said the numbers did not match. He had said Nathan knew enough. Most importantly, he had said that he needed proof. I began with the books. Dad had owned hundreds of them, but he kept a smaller collection in his bedroom. Local histories, biographies, old travel guides, and several books about the Blue Ridge Mountains. He often hid birthday money for his grandchildren inside books because, as he liked to say, no thief was patient enough to read. I checked each one. For nearly an hour, I found nothing except newspaper clippings and dried leaves. Then I pulled out a thick book titled The Forgotten Trails of the Blue Ridge. Something metallic struck the floor. A small brass key landed near my shoe. Inside the book, I found a folded piece of paper with 6 numbers written in Dad's uneven hand. 4-1822, 7-31-9. There was no explanation. I slipped the key and paper into my pocket. As I returned the book to the shelf, I heard footsteps in the hallway. I turned off the bedside lamp and stood still. The door opened slowly. Susan Bell stepped inside. She pressed one hand to her chest when she saw me. "You frightened me. You frightened me too." I saw a light under the door. She lowered her voice. "Richard has been checking the security cameras. I came through the kitchen. That camera stopped working last month. Henry kept telling him it needed replacement." I almost smiled. For once, Richard's refusal to approve a repair had helped me. Susan looked around the half-empty room. "What are you searching for?" "I'm not sure." I showed her the key and the numbers. She examined them, but shook her head. "I don't recognize the sequence. Did Dad ever mention problems in the accounts?" Her expression changed. He asked me questions during the last few months. "What kind? Vendor payments, renovation costs, transfers between operating accounts?" "Why didn't you tell me?" "He asked me not to. He said he needed to know whether the discrepancies were carelessness or something deliberate." "What did you find?" Susan sat on the edge of the bed. The roof replacement was the first thing. Richard reported that it cost nearly $210,000. That much. The contractor's original proposal was $74,000. A cold pressure formed beneath my ribs. Where did the rest go? The payment records showed multiple subcontractors, but Maria could not verify several of them. Some business addresses led to empty offices. "Did Richard know you were checking?" "He found out. That was when he started limiting our access." Susan told me Dad had begun reviewing records privately after Richard left each evening. He asked Maria to print duplicate ledgers and keep them away from the main office. When his health declined, he became frightened the originals would disappear. "Where are the duplicates?" I asked. Maria kept some. Henry may have others. "And Dad?" He told me he created his own file. The brass key suddenly felt heavier in my hand. "Did he have a lockbox?" "Not one I knew about." I looked at the 6 numbers again. Then Susan remembered something. The old archive room. Carter Ridge had once used a basement room to store guest registers and payroll records. Dad had installed a row of metal cabinets there decades earlier. Few employees entered it now because most recent records were digital. We went downstairs. The archive room smelled of dust paper and damp stone. Susan switched on a single overhead bulb. Along the far wall stood 8 gray cabinets with combination locks and keyholes. The brass key opened cabinet number 4. Inside was a smaller black document box secured by a 6-number keypad. I entered Dad's sequence. The lock clicked. The box contained copies of invoices, bank statements, canceled checks, and handwritten notes. Every page had been arranged by date. Dad had been building a case. One set of invoices showed payments for plumbing repairs that no employee remembered taking place. Another listed landscaping services during the winter months when the ground had been frozen. Several companies had nearly identical mailing addresses. Then I found the name from Mark's document. Blue Heron Holdings. Over 18 months, Carter Ridge Lodge had transferred hundreds of thousands of dollars to Blue Heron for consulting project coordination and property evaluation. The amounts were never identical. Some were $12,000. Others were $36,000 or $48,000. Small enough to disappear among the lodge's legitimate expenses, but together they formed a pattern. Susan pointed to a signature on one of the authorizations. That is Richard's. Another document included an email chain about a proposed sale to Harlow Development Group. At the bottom of one page, Mark was listed as the transaction's cooperating real estate broker. My son had not merely heard about the deal. He had been positioned to earn money from it. I continued reading. Claire's name appeared on several emails arranging surveys, legal reviews, and environmental inspections. She wrote as though the sale were already approved. In one message, she told a Harlow executive that the remaining family consent issue would be resolved after Walter's death. My hands began to tremble. Dad had been alive when they wrote those words. They had not waited for his death to consider selling Carter Ridge. They had planned around it. I photographed every page. When we reached the business registration documents, however, there was no clear owner listed for Blue Heron Holdings. It had been registered through an agent in Delaware. The mailing address led to a shared corporate office. Richard may own it, Susan said, or Mark. I hated myself for saying it, but I could no longer protect him from suspicion. I called Nathan the next morning. He listened without interrupting as I described the document box. "Bring me copies," he said. "Do you already know about Blue Heron?" A long pause followed. "I know Walter was investigating it. Who owns it?" "I am not ready to answer that. Not ready, Nathan. My family tried to trick me into signing away my rights. That is precisely why you must not confront them yet. They are clearing offices and preparing a sale, and if they believe you know everything, they will stop acting openly." I walked to my kitchen window and stared at the quiet street. How much did Dad tell you? Enough to know he was frightened. Not enough to complete the legal chain without additional evidence. I found evidence. You found part of it. What else is there? Nathan's voice became firmer. Evelyn, listen to me carefully. Do not tell Richard about the document box. Do not tell Mark you copied his authorization form. And do not reveal that you have seen the Blue Heron payments. Why? Because Walter wanted you protected, but he also wanted the truth established beyond denial. I closed my eyes. What am I supposed to do? Continue as though you remain uncertain. They already think I am weak. Let them. His answer disturbed me. Then he added, "Do not confront them until you have everything Walter wanted you to see." After the call, I spread the copied records across my dining table. Richard had signed the payments. Claire had coordinated the sale. Mark had been named as the broker. Yet, Blue Heron's true ownership remained hidden. That company was the center of the plan. I could feel it. I picked up Dad's photograph and placed it beside the files. The people I loved believed I was standing between them and a profitable future. What they did not understand was that Dad had left a trail behind him, and I had finally begun to follow it. The first person to suggest that I was losing my mind was Linda. She did not say it directly to me. She said it to everyone else. Within a week, 2 cousins called to ask whether I was taking care of myself. A woman from Dad's church offered to drive me to a medical appointment I had never scheduled. Then my former colleague Carol telephoned and asked whether I had forgotten our lunch plans. We did not make lunch plans, I told her. There was a pause. Linda said you were becoming confused about dates. My grip tightened around the telephone. What else did Linda say? That grief has been difficult for you. Grief was difficult. That part was true. I sometimes woke believing I had heard Dad's cane in the hallway. I still prepared 2 cups of coffee before remembering there was no one to drink the second. Once, I drove halfway to the pharmacy before realizing I no longer needed to collect his medication. Those were the habits of a grieving daughter. Linda was turning them into evidence. I called her. She answered in a bright voice. Evelyn, how are you feeling today? Why are you telling people I am confused? I am concerned about you. You told Carol I forgot a lunch appointment that never existed. Linda sighed as though I were exhausting her. Perhaps you forgot making it. I did not. This is exactly what worries me. You become defensive whenever someone tries to help. Stop discussing my mental health with other people. I am your sister. That does not give you permission to invent symptoms. I have seen you repeat yourself. I cared for a dying man while the rest of you visited when convenient. I was tired. You still are tired. I am not incapable. I never used that word. She did not need to. 2 days later, Nathan forwarded me a formal letter Richard's attorney had sent to his office. The letter requested that I undergo a capacity evaluation before receiving any decision-making authority connected to the family trust. It alleged that I had shown signs of memory loss, emotional instability, paranoia, and an inability to distinguish personal attachment from sound business judgment. They used my concern over the missing financial records as proof of paranoia. They used my refusal to sign Mark's authorization form as proof I could not understand ordinary legal documents. They even mentioned that I had continued living at Carter Ridge after Dad's death, as evidence that I was unable to accept reality. I read the letter twice before I could speak. They are building a case, I told Nathan. Yes. Can they do this? They can request an evaluation. That does not mean they will succeed. What if a judge believes them? Then we respond with facts. His calmness irritated me. My brother, sister, son, and daughter-in-law will all tell the same story. 4 people against 1. 4 people repeating a coordinated claim do not turn it into truth. They are my family. That gives them credibility. It also gives them a financial motive. Nathan asked whether I had a regular physician. I did. He suggested I schedule a standard examination and document my health before Richard's attorney tried to control the process. I hated the idea. It felt like agreeing that I needed to prove I was still myself. But I made the appointment. The doctor found no sign of cognitive impairment. I completed memory tests, problem-solving exercises, and a full physical examination. I could name the date, identify every object shown to me, remember a list of words, and explain exactly why my family wanted control of Carter Ridge. The report should have ended the matter. It did not. Claire arranged a meeting at First Mountain Bank under the pretense of discussing Dad's estate accounts. When I arrived, Richard, Mark, and Linda were already seated with a senior banking officer named Daniel Morris. Claire stood as I entered. We were worried you had forgotten. The meeting is at 2. It is 1:55. Linda gave Daniel a sad smile. She has always been proud. I sat down slowly. Daniel looked uncomfortable. I understand the family has questions about account access. Richard pushed a folder toward him. We need temporary authority while the estate review continues. Daniel opened the folder. These documents require the consent of the designated parties. That is why Evelyn is here, Claire said. I examined the form. It was another authorization this time, allowing Richard to manage funds associated with Carter Ridge's operations. I will not sign this. Mark leaned toward me. Mom, we explained this yesterday. No, you did not. We spoke on the phone. We have not spoken since Sunday. Linda touched my arm. Evelyn, please. I pulled away. Claire watched Daniel closely. Do you see what we are dealing with? She does not remember conversations. That conversation never happened. Richard shook his head. This is becoming painful. I understood then. The meeting was not meant to obtain my signature. It was a performance. They wanted Daniel Morris to witness me contradicting them. I looked directly at him. Mr. Morris, before this meeting began, were you told that I was suffering from memory loss? He hesitated. I was informed that the family had concerns. Were you told those concerns are part of an effort to have me declared incapable of managing a trust? Richard interrupted. This is not appropriate. It is completely appropriate. I turned back to Daniel. Did anyone provide you with a medical report? No. Did anyone tell you I passed a cognitive examination this week? His eyes shifted toward Richard. No. I removed a copy of the doctor's report from my purse and placed it on the table. I will not sign financial authority over to a man whose transactions are being audited. The room went still. I had revealed more than Nathan wanted, but not enough to mention Blue Heron. Richard's face hardened. What audit? The one Dad requested. Daniel closed the authorization folder. I believe this meeting should end until legal ownership and authority are established. Claire's expression sharpened. Mr. Morris, the bank has obligations to protect the accounts. It also has obligations not to facilitate unauthorized transfers. Richard stood so quickly, his chair struck the wall. You will regret treating us like criminals. Daniel did not respond. As the others left, he asked me to remain. When the door closed, he lowered his voice. Mrs. Carter, I cannot disclose confidential account details without proper authorization. I understand. However, your father asked me a question several months ago about one specific transfer. He wrote a date and amount on a sheet of bank stationery, $92,000. The transfer had been approved by Richard and sent to Blue Heron Holdings. There were no supporting invoices attached, Daniel said. Your father requested copies. Richard later submitted a consulting agreement, but the agreement was dated after the payment, so the contract was created afterward. That is what concerned your father. Can I have a copy? Not yet, but the audit can request it. I folded the paper and placed it in my purse. Why are you helping me? Daniel looked toward the closed door. Because confusion is not the same as disagreement. I watched 4 people try to make those things appear identical. The following Sunday, Linda humiliated me publicly. After church, several families gathered in the fellowship hall for coffee. I was speaking with Reverend Collins when Linda approached with 2 women from her Bible group. She touched my shoulder. Evelyn, you should not be driving yourself. I am perfectly capable of driving. We discussed this. No, you discussed it with other people. The women exchanged concerned glances. Linda lowered her voice just enough to make certain they could still hear. You are holding on to Carter Ridge because accepting the business decisions would mean accepting that Dad is gone. That is not true. You believe everyone is plotting against you. Some conversations around us stopped. I felt the old instinct to remain quiet, to protect the family from embarrassment. Then I remembered Dad's files. Linda, are you telling these people I'm mentally unwell because you are worried about me, or because Richard promised you something if I lose control of the lodge? Her face went pale. I do not know what you are talking about. Then stop speaking about my health. I walked away before she could recover. My legs shook all the way to the parking lot. They wanted me to doubt my own memory. They wanted friends, bankers, lawyers, and eventually a judge to see me as a grieving old woman who could not make decisions. For one terrible night, their voices followed me through the house. Perhaps I was being suspicious. Perhaps the financial documents had explanations. Perhaps Mark had truly wanted to protect me. Then I placed Daniel Morris's note beside the Blue Heron payments. $92,000 had been transferred before a contract existed. That was not grief. That was not confusion. That was evidence. And I finally understood the urgency behind their attack. They needed me, declared incapable before the audit was finished. Nathan asked me to meet him on a Tuesday evening after his office closed. Come alone, he said. Use the rear entrance. His request made me nervous, but I followed it. At 6:30, downtown Asheville had begun to empty. I parked in a narrow lot behind Nathan's building and entered through a metal door. His assistant had already gone home. Nathan was waiting in the conference room with 3 thick binders and an old leather document case. He locked the door behind me. Is that really necessary? I asked. Richard's attorney called twice today, asking whether you had met with me. How would Richard know? Your sister has been asking members of my staff questions. I sat across from him. Then tell me what everyone is so desperate to hide. Nathan placed the leather case on the table. This belonged to your mother. I recognized the initials stamped into the worn leather. M.C., my mother. Margaret Carter had carried that case whenever she handled the lodge accounts. She had been gone for 21 years, yet seeing her initials made me feel as though she might walk through the door. Nathan opened the first binder. Most people in your family believe Walter owned Carter Ridge Lodge outright. Didn't he know? The answer was so simple that I initially thought I had misunderstood. Nathan slid a document toward me. 23 years earlier, Carter Ridge had nearly failed. A series of severe winters, structural repairs, and an unsuccessful expansion had placed the lodge under enormous debt. I remembered that period. Dad had stopped sleeping. Mother sold jewelry and quietly canceled plans to renovate their home. Richard claimed the business could be saved if the family accepted outside investors. What I had not known was that Mother had inherited valuable farmland and investment accounts from her parents. She used her inheritance to pay the lodge's debts, Nathan said. Nearly $1 million. I stared at the figure. Why didn't she tell us she did not want the family treating her inheritance as a permanent source of rescue? Nathan showed me the trust agreement Mother had created. Margaret Carter Family Trust. The trust had purchased a 61% controlling interest in the land buildings and operating company. Dad retained a minority interest and served as managing trustee while he lived. He was not the sole owner, I whispered. No. He was the manager and lifetime beneficiary. What happened after Mother died? Walter continued under the trust terms. And after Dad, Nathan turned several pages. A successor trustee assumes control. I already knew the answer before he pointed to the name. Evelyn Carter. For several seconds, the words blurred. This cannot be right. It is. Why me? Nathan removed a letter Mother had written when the trust was created. She described the year I had cashed out part of my retirement savings to help the lodge meet payroll. I had been 43 then, recently divorced and raising Mark alone. Dad had promised to repay me, but the business remained unstable, and I eventually told him to consider the money a gift. I had almost forgotten. Mother had not. She wrote that you were the only child who helped without asking what authority or profit you would receive in return, Nathan said. I looked down at my hands. Richard worked at the lodge. He also demanded an ownership share in exchange for each financial contribution. And Linda. Your mother loved Linda, but she did not trust her judgment under pressure. What about Mark? He was 18 when the trust was formed. A future provision could have included him, but Margaret did not name grandchildren as successor trustees. I read the page again. I had spent weeks allowing my family to speak as though I were a temporary guest, standing in the way of the true owners. All that time, the controlling interest had already passed to me. Why didn't Dad tell me the trust required formal confirmation after his death? More importantly, Walter believed that if Richard knew you were the successor, he would change tactics. He already tried to take my authority. Yes, but he believed he was trying to obtain a possible interest. He does not know you control 61%. I thought about Mark's document. If I had signed the authorization, he would have gained the ability to act in your name before you knew what you controlled. My stomach turned. They planned this carefully. Walter believed so. Nathan opened the second binder. 3 months before Dad died, he had hired an independent forensic accountant named Rebecca Sloan. She had been reviewing 8 years of vendor records transfers, contracts, and property negotiations. The preliminary audit identified almost $480,000 in payments that were unsupported, inflated, or directed toward companies with hidden relationships to members of the family. 480,000, I repeated. That figure may increase. Does Richard know? He knows there is a review. He does not know how much Rebecca has documented. Is Blue Heron included? Nathan's eyes met mine. It is central. Who owns it? He did not answer immediately. I need you to understand that business registrations can hide ownership behind agents and holding structures. Rebecca has traced most of the chain, but Walter wanted one final category of evidence. What category? Intent. I frowned. The transfers show intent. They show questionable conduct. Richard will claim that every payment was for legitimate consulting. Claire may argue that she merely coordinated a potential sale. Mark can say he relied on others. Linda can deny knowing anything. So they can all blame one another, unless they act together in a way that proves a coordinated purpose. I pushed back from the table. You are waiting for them to do something worse. We are waiting for them to complete what they have already begun. Nathan's words disturbed me. What did Dad expect them to do? Present you with a final agreement. The papers at dinner. Nathan nodded. Walter predicted they would eventually gather as a family use emotional pressure and demand that you sign quickly. He believed they would reveal more in that room than they ever would in separate legal interviews. And I'm supposed to let them. You do not have to do anything. But Dad wanted me to. He wanted you protected. The choice remains yours. I walked to the window. Below us, headlights moved through the wet streets. Did he know Mark was involved? Nathan's silence answered me. I turned around. How much Rebecca found communications identifying him as the broker for the planned sale. I know that. There are also references to a commission and debt settlement. I closed my eyes. My son had not merely hoped the sale might rescue him. Someone had promised to rescue him in exchange for his cooperation. Did he receive stolen money? We do not yet know. I returned to the table. What happens if I refuse to participate? The trust is still yours. The audit continues. We can seek injunctions and pursue civil claims, and if I allow them to present the agreement, we document exactly what they say and do. Document how Nathan did not answer directly. Instead, he opened the final binder and showed me Dad's written instructions. Walter had created a sequence. The sealed letter would identify the moment when the plan had reached its final stage. Once I opened it, I was to contact Nathan immediately. Nathan would then disclose the trust and present the completed evidence. Dad had not left me a sentimental farewell. He had designed a safeguard. He knew they would corner me, I said. He feared they would. A painful thought entered my mind. Did he trust anyone besides me? Nathan closed the binder. He trusted the people who had earned it. I wiped my eyes. Knowing Mother had chosen me should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like standing inside the ruins of my family and discovering I owned the ground beneath them. Before I left, Nathan placed a copy of the trust appointment in my hands. You are not powerless, Evelyn. I do not feel powerful. Power and peace are not the same thing. At the door, I asked him one last question. If the evidence is already strong, why did Dad insist on waiting for their final move? Nathan's expression became sad. Because financial crimes can be explained away. Families are very skilled at rewriting the past. Walter wanted you to hear the truth directly, so no one could later convince you that you had misunderstood. I carried Mother's trust document home beneath my coat. My family believed they were trying to strip authority from an uncertain old woman. They had no idea that Mother had placed Carter Ridge in my hands more than 2 decades earlier. But Nathan was right about one thing. I did not yet have peace. I still needed to hear how far they were willing to go. Richard's invitation arrived 2 days later. He did not call me himself. Linda did. Her voice trembled when I answered. Evelyn, I hate what is happening to us. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone and looked at the trust document Nathan had given me. What exactly is happening, Linda? We are becoming enemies. I did not change the locks. Fire employees call surveyors or tell people you were mentally unwell. I know mistakes were made. Mistakes. She began to cry. Dad would be heartbroken if he saw us like this. Using Dad's memory to pressure me was cruel. but Linda spoke as though she were the victim. What do you want? Richard is arranging a family dinner at the lodge on Saturday. No lawyers, no arguments, just us. Claire will be there, yes. Mark. Of course, the exact group Dad had named. My fingers tightened around the receiver. What is the dinner really about reconciliation? Will there be papers? She hesitated. There may be a temporary agreement. Then it is not simply dinner. Please come, Evelyn. We cannot heal if you refuse to sit at the same table. I almost admired the manipulation. They were not demanding that I attend. They were preparing to accuse me of destroying the family if I stayed away. I will think about it. After we ended the call, I contacted Nathan. They have invited me to dinner. When Saturday at 7? Did they mention an agreement? Linda tried not to. Nathan was quiet for a moment. You are not legally required to attend. I know. If you feel unsafe, do not go. I do not think they will physically harm me. People under financial pressure can behave unpredictably. They want my signature, not my body. That distinction may not comfort you if they prevent you from leaving. His warning unsettled me. The next afternoon, Mark came to see me. This time, he brought nothing. He looked exhausted. His shirt was wrinkled, and dark circles had formed beneath his eyes. Did Aunt Linda tell you about dinner? Yes. Will you come? I have not decided. He sat across from me. Mom Harlow gave us a deadline. Us, the family. You mean the people receiving money from the sale? His eyes dropped. I know you found my name on the transaction paperwork. How Claire said you asked questions about Blue Heron. I never told Claire that. He realized his mistake immediately. Who told her? I don't know. Were you discussing my signature with Blue Heron before Grandpa died? Mark pressed both palms against the table. I cannot answer everything right now. You mean you will not? If the deal disappears, the buyer will sue over expenses. Surveys, legal reviews, planning costs. They entered property they did not own. They believed the family supported the transaction. Did you tell them that I said approval was expected? From whom? He looked at me. Grandpa was sick. That is not an answer. Mark stood and paced the kitchen. Uncle Richard said the trust would be divided among the children. Claire said we only needed everyone's consent until probate finished. And you believed them. I needed to. That was the most honest sentence he had spoken. You needed the money, I said. My house is weeks away from foreclosure. Then tell me the complete truth. He shook his head. Saturday. We will explain everything Saturday. Why not now? Because Richard says separate conversations create confusion. No. Separate conversations make it harder for everyone to repeat the same lie. His face tightened. Please, Mom. There was real fear in his voice. Come to dinner. Listen to the proposal. If you still hate it afterward, then refuse. You already tried to obtain authority through a document you misrepresented. I was desperate. And now I am more desperate. For the first time, he did not hide behind family loyalty or business necessity. He simply looked like a frightened man. Part of me wanted to save him. That instinct had guided me through his childhood. I had worked 2 jobs after my divorce, so he could remain at the same school. I had paid his college expenses, helped with his first home deposit, and watched his children whenever he asked. But saving a child from danger is not the same as helping an adult avoid consequences. I will come, I said. Relief crossed his face, but I am promising nothing else. He nodded too quickly. That is all we ask. It was not all they asked. We both knew it. After he left, I returned to Carter Ridge. I waited until the office hallway was empty, then entered Dad's bedroom and searched the remaining books again. Nathan had said Dad wanted me to hear the truth directly. I wondered whether he had left further instructions outside the sealed letter. Inside an old family Bible, I found a narrow strip of paper marking the book of Proverbs. Dad had written one sentence on it. Let them speak until silence frightens them, more than honesty. On the reverse side, he had added, the truth needs to be heard in their own voices. I sat on the edge of his bed. The note confirmed what Nathan had explained. Dad expected the dinner to become more than a negotiation. He wanted them to reveal their intent while believing I remained powerless. The idea frightened me. I had spent most of my life avoiding family confrontation. As a school counselor, I could sit calmly between angry parents, troubled teenagers, and administrators who blamed one another. But with my own family, I became the older sister who kept the peace and the mother who apologized first. Dad was asking me not to rescue anyone from their own words. On Friday, Nathan and I met once more. He told me not to reveal the trust, even if they threaten court action, especially then. So what if they demand I sign immediately? Refuse. And when do I open the letter? When the situation matches Walter's instruction, everyone involved is, together papers are before you, and they make your signature the price of saving the family. I handed him the note from the Bible. He read it and nodded. He wanted clarity. He wanted a confession. Perhaps both. I gave Nathan the exact dinner time and asked whether he would remain nearby. I will be available, he said. That is not the same as nearby. It is the answer I can give you. I studied his face but could not read it. Saturday arrived beneath a sky heavy with rain. I dressed carefully in a dark blue blouse, black trousers, and Mother's small silver brooch. I placed Dad's sealed envelope in my purse beside my phone and the copy of my medical evaluation. Before leaving, I looked at myself in the mirror. I did not see a powerful trustee. I saw a 66-year-old widow who had lost her father and was about to sit across from the people she loved while they tried to take his home. My hands shook. Then I remembered Mother's trust and Dad's note. Let them speak. I drove into the mountains as rain began striking the windshield. Carter Ridge Lodge appeared through the mist, its windows glowing warmly against the dark trees. From the outside, it looked like the safest place in the world. Inside, my family was waiting. The dining room at Carter Ridge Lodge had been prepared as though we were celebrating something. Candles burned along the center of the long oak table. Dad's best china had been brought from the locked cabinet, and crystal glasses stood beside folded linen napkins. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace. For one painful second, the room reminded me of Christmas dinners when Mother was alive. Then I saw the leather folders stacked beside Richard's chair. Linda greeted me first. She embraced me tightly enough to perform affection, but not long enough to feel it. I'm so glad you came. Richard stood near the bar pouring wine. Red or white water? He smiled. Still suspicious, still thirsty. Claire sat beside Mark wearing a gray dress and a calm expression. Mark looked as though he had not slept. When I entered, he stood, but did not approach me. I placed my purse beside my chair. Dad's envelope was inside. Dinner began pleasantly. That was what made it so disturbing. Linda spoke about childhood summers at the lodge. Richard told a story about Dad teaching him to fish. Claire asked about my grandchildren's school, as though she had not helped arrange a campaign to declare me mentally incapable. Mark barely ate. I waited. Let them speak. After the main course, the plates were cleared by a young server named Emma. Richard told her the family needed privacy and instructed her not to return until he called. When the doors closed, the warmth disappeared. Richard placed one of the leather folders in front of me. We have all agreed that tonight must end the uncertainty. I did not touch it. What uncertainty? The future of Carter Ridge. Linda reached across the table. We want to make a decision as a family. You have already made one. We have considered the best option, Claire said. For whom? For the property, the employees, and future generations. Her language was polished, almost rehearsed. Richard opened the folder. Inside was a contract with colored tabs marking several signature pages. Harlow Development has increased its offer, he said. The sale price is $12.8 million. Linda inhaled dramatically, as though she were hearing the number for the first time. What exactly are they buying? I asked. The lodge surrounding land development rights and operating assets. The North Meadow, yes. The cabins. Yes, Dad's house. Richard's patience began to weaken. The entire property. And what will happen to the employees? Harlow may retain some of them. May, Claire folded her hands. No buyer guarantees staffing before restructuring. So people who served this family for decades could lose their jobs. Mark finally spoke. Mom, the lodge cannot continue as it is because the accounts are empty. Richard's eyes narrowed. Who told you that? You did through Mark. The business has serious liquidity problems, despite strong occupancy. Revenue does not equal profit, especially when money is being transferred to outside consultants. Claire's gaze sharpened. What outside consultants? I looked at her. You tell me. Richard closed the folder. This is precisely why we asked for a capacity review. You repeat accusations without understanding business records? I wanted to mention Blue Heron. Instead, I followed Dad's instructions. I remained quiet. Richard mistook my silence for uncertainty. The sale proceeds will be distributed according to the family's interests after debts and transaction costs are paid. He continued, everyone benefits. How much will Mark receive? My son looked down. His share and an ordinary brokerage commission? Claire answered. How ordinary? That is private. Not if he needs my signature. Mark swallowed. Mom, please read the agreement. I opened the folder. The contract was nearly 100 pages long. It included the sale of land buildings equipment business names and future development rights. One clause required every person with a current or potential claim to waive objections. My signature had already been printed beneath the line. All that remained was ink. When did negotiations begin? I asked. Months ago, Richard said. Before Dad died, no one answered. I looked at Mark. Did your grandfather approve this deal? He glanced at Claire. Richard interrupted. Walter was no longer capable of making major business decisions. That is not what I asked. He knew the lodge needed change. Did he approve this buyer? Linda exhaled sharply. Evelyn, why must you turn everything into an interrogation? Because you brought me a contract prepared before Dad's death and expect me to sign without asking questions. Claire's voice became colder. The buyer has spent significant money relying on representations made by the family. If the transaction fails, now Harlow may pursue legal action. Against whom? Potentially the estate. Potentially anyone who obstructed the agreement after allowing the company to proceed. I did not allow anything. They may argue that you benefited from the lodge while remaining silent. I almost laughed. I was caring for Dad while you surveyed his property. This emotional framing does not help you, Claire said. Neither does threatening me. It is not a threat. It is a legal reality. Richard turned several pages and pointed to a tab. Sign the acknowledgement tonight. The remaining documents can be completed next week. No. The word left my mouth calmly. Linda leaned back. You did not even read everything. I have read enough. You are going to destroy $12 million because of sentiment. I am refusing to sell property no one has proven they own. Richard's face reddened. We are Walter's children. So am I. You have behaved as though you are his only child. I looked around the table. Which of you cared for him when he could not stand alone? Linda's eyes filled with angry tears. There it is again. Saint Evelyn. I did not call myself a saint. You never had to, she said. You made sure everyone else felt guilty. I asked for help. Nothing we did was ever enough. You visited 4 times last year. I have my own life, so did I. The words silenced her. Mark pushed his chair back slightly. Can we stop doing this? Richard pointed toward the contract. We stop when she signs. I looked at him. And if I do not? He leaned back and exchanged a glance with Claire. Then we proceed with the capacity petition. Linda lowered her eyes. Mark whispered Uncle Richard. No, Richard said. She needs to understand. He turned toward me. We have statements from family members documenting memory problems, irrational suspicions, missed appointments, and emotional instability. We have evidence that you cannot separate grief from financial decisions. My doctor disagrees. One doctor's report is not final. You would ask a judge to declare me incompetent because I refuse to make you rich. Claire spoke carefully. A court may appoint a neutral representative who can evaluate the sale without emotional interference. Neutral. A professional fiduciary. Selected by whom? That would be decided later. I knew what they intended. Once I was removed, they would pressure or mislead whoever replaced me. Mark looked ill. Mom just signed the preliminary page. I turned to him. Did you know they planned to threaten me with a capacity petition tonight? He did not answer. Mark, I knew it might be discussed. You brought me here anyway. I thought once you saw the offer, you thought $12 million would make me forget that you tried to deceive me. That is not fair. What part is unfair? His voice broke. My family could lose our home, and that gives you the right to take mine. This lodge is not your home alone. Richard struck the table with his palm. Enough. The crystal glasses trembled. He stood, walked to the dining room doors, and turned the lock. The click was soft, but every person heard it. My heart began beating faster. Unlock the door, I said. When we finish. Claire did not look surprised. Linda stared at her plate. Mark rose halfway from his chair. Uncle Richard, this is unnecessary. Sit down. Mark obeyed. That hurt almost more than the locked door. Richard returned to his seat and placed a pen beside my hand. No one is harming you. No one is stealing from you. We are asking you to stop punishing the family. You fired employees, removed records, entered negotiations before Dad died, and told people I was losing my mind. Because you are behaving irrationally. Claire pushed the signature page closer. If you sign, the family can move forward. If you refuse, tomorrow morning, our attorney files the petition. Linda added softly, Please do not make us do that. Their roles were clear, Richard threatened. Claire explained. Linda pleaded. Mark provided the wound deep enough to make me surrender. I looked at my son. Is this what you want? Tears stood in his eyes. I want this nightmare to end, so do I. I reached for my purse. Richard watched closely, perhaps expecting me to retrieve identification or glasses. Instead, I removed Dad's sealed envelope. Linda frowned. What is that? Dad gave it to me the night before he died. Richard laughed. The others followed, though Mark's laughter sounded forced. I placed the envelope on the table. He told me not to open it until the entire family sat together and pressured me to sign papers involving Carter Ridge. Richard's smile widened. How convenient. Those were his instructions. Walter was medicated and confused, Claire said. A private letter has no legal effect. Linda shook her head. This is another attempt to make yourself the center of Dad's final days. Mark stared at the wax seal. What does it say? I do not know. Richard picked up the pen and tapped it against the contract. A dead man's letter will not save you, Evelyn. Their laughter filled Dad's dining room. I thought of Mother's trust. I thought of the hidden invoices. I thought of Dad warning me that my family would eventually place papers before me and call my signature the only way to save everyone. Then I broke the wax seal. The laughter continued until I unfolded the first page. I read the opening sentence aloud. Evelyn, if they have cornered you together, then everything I feared has begun. The room went silent. No one moved after I read the first sentence. The fire crackled behind Richard, and somewhere in the kitchen, a metal tray struck a counter. The ordinary sounds of the lodge continued, but inside the dining room, time seemed to stop. Richard recovered first. That proves nothing, he said. Dad knew families discuss property after a death. I lowered my eyes to the letter. Dad's handwriting was uneven, but every word was clear. My dear Evelyn, I continued. I am sorry that you are reading this under the circumstances I feared. If Richard has placed a contract before you, if Linda has appealed to your guilt, if Claire has spoken of deadlines or legal consequences, and if Mark has asked you to sacrifice yourself for the sake of his family, then they have chosen money over honesty. Linda's face drained of color. Claire sat perfectly still. Mark whispered, "How could he know?" Richard pointed at me. "Because she told him. She helped write this." I looked up. Dad gave me the sealed envelope the night before he died. You saw me break the wax. A seal can be replaced. Nathan had warned me that people would deny what was directly before them. Still, hearing Richard accuse me so quickly made something inside me ache. I returned to the letter. Richard will claim that the lodge is failing. Ask him why legitimate expenses were inflated and why money was paid to companies that performed no work. Richard pushed away from the table. This is absurd. I kept reading. Ask Claire why she communicated with Harlow Development before I agreed to sell. Ask Mark what he was promised for obtaining your signature. Ask Linda what she expected to receive after the transaction. Linda stared at Richard. You told me Dad didn't know. Be quiet. Richard snapped. Dad's letter continued. The roof did not cost $210,000. The plumbing repairs did not happen. The winter landscaping invoices were false. Money was removed from Carter Ridge in amounts designed to appear ordinary. Claire interrupted. These are allegations written by an ill man. None of this is proof. You seem very certain about what is and is not proof, I said. I understand business law. You also understood that Dad was alive when you told Harlow the remaining consent issue would be resolved after his death. Mark turned sharply toward her. You wrote that Claire's expression changed for the first time. Those words were taken out of context. So, you did write them. This is not the time. Richard struck the table again. Evelyn stopped reading. I met his eyes. You locked the door to keep me here. Now you want me silent. He looked toward the door, perhaps realizing how his action appeared. I read the next paragraph. Evelyn, they will tell you that refusing to sign will ruin the family. Remember that the people who created the danger do not have the right to make your surrender the solution. My voice shook. Dad had known me too well. He knew that guilt would be the weapon most likely to break me. He knew I might sacrifice my home, my rights, and my dignity if Mark looked frightened enough. The next lines were written more heavily as though Dad had pressed the pen hard against the paper. When you reach this point, call Nathan Reed. Tell him the family has completed the circle. Richard laughed once, but there was no humor in it. Nathan cannot change the ownership records. I reached for my phone. Claire stood. You are not calling anyone until we finish this discussion. Sit down, Claire, Mark said. She stared at him. It was the first time that evening he had challenged her. I dialed Nathan. He answered after the first ring. They are all here, I said. The contract is on the table. Richard locked the door. I understand. That was all he said before ending the call. Richard moved toward the dining room entrance and unlocked it. There. No one is being held. The door opened from the other side before he could step away. Nathan entered carrying his leather case. Behind him stood a woman in her early 50s whom I had never met. She wore a dark suit and held 2 large folders. A younger man followed with a laptop case and a portable projector. Richard stared at them. How did you get into the lodge? Through the front entrance, Nathan said, It remains a functioning business. You were waiting outside. I was available when Evelyn needed me. Claire recovered quickly. You have no right to interrupt a private family meeting. Nathan looked at the contract on the table. A meeting involving the proposed sale of trust property is not merely private. The words changed the air in the room. Richard's eyes narrowed. What trust property? Nathan introduced the woman beside him. This is Rebecca Sloan, the forensic accountant. Walter Carter retained 3 months before his death. Rebecca placed the folders on the table. Richard looked at her, then at me. You knew about this. I learned about it recently. You have been setting us up. No, Nathan said. Walter responded to conduct that had already occurred. Claire folded her arms. An accountant's suspicion does not change title. You are correct, Nathan replied. Title is changed by legal instruments. He removed a certified document from his case and placed it beside the sale contract. The controlling 61% interest in Carter Ridge Lodge, its operating company, and the associated land is owned by the Margaret Carter Family Trust. Linda stared at the document. Mother had a trust. Yes. Richard shook his head. Dad dissolved it years ago. He did not have the authority to dissolve it. He managed the lodge as lifetime managing trustee. Nathan turned toward me. Upon Walter's death, the successor trustee assumed control subject to formal certification. Richard looked from Nathan to me. No. Nathan's voice remained calm. The successor trustee is Evelyn Carter. No one spoke. I had imagined this revelation several times since Nathan showed me Mother's documents. I thought I might feel vindicated. Instead, I watched my son's face collapse and felt only sadness. Richard picked up the certified copy. This is fraudulent. It was executed 23 years ago, Nathan said. It has been maintained continuously, reported appropriately, and confirmed by the court records. Why were we not told? Because you were not beneficiaries with management rights. Linda's lips parted. What does that mean for us? It means none of you had authority to negotiate the sale of the controlling interest. Claire looked toward the contract. Harlow was informed that family consent was pending. Harlow was informed that Walter's heirs would control the property, Nathan replied. That representation was false. Richard threw the document onto the table. Evelyn still has to consider the offer? A trustee must act in the beneficiary's best interests. Nathan's gaze hardened. You are not a beneficiary of the controlling trust. Richard's face reddened. What? You have no right to demand that Evelyn approve this sale. Linda reached for her wine but knocked the glass over. Red wine spread across the white tablecloth like a stain. Mark stared at me. You knew when you came tonight. I knew Mother had chosen me as successor. And you let us sit here and beg. You did not beg Mark. You threatened to help declare me incompetent. His mouth closed. Claire leaned toward Nathan. Even if Evelyn controls the trust, the family retains other interests. The transaction can be restructured. That is unlikely, Rebecca Sloan said for the first time. Her voice was quiet but firm. She opened the first folder. The distribution of Walter Carter's remaining estate has been temporarily suspended pending the completion of a forensic audit. Linda's eyes widened. My inheritance. All cash distributions are on hold, Nathan said. Richard looked at Rebecca. On what authority? On evidence of misappropriation, false invoicing, undisclosed conflicts of interest, and potential fraud. You cannot make accusations without proof. Rebecca opened the second folder. I did not come without proof. She placed a stack of bank records on the table. Richard stopped speaking. Nathan reached into his case once more and removed a small external drive. Walter also recorded a statement shortly before his death. Mark looked at the device as though it contained a ghost. Claire's voice sharpened. A recorded statement is not automatically admissible. Perhaps not for every legal purpose, Nathan said, but Walter did not create it only for a courtroom. He looked at me. He created it so Evelyn would know the truth. I glanced down at Dad's letter. The final paragraph on that page read, I could not protect you from the pain of discovering who participated. I could only make certain they could not take your future while denying what they had done. My eyes filled with tears. Across the table, the people who had laughed at my envelope now sat in silence. The contract remained open before me, my signature line waiting, but it no longer looked like a demand. It looked like evidence. The younger man who had entered with Nathan placed the projector on a side table and lowered the dining room lights. Richard objected immediately. I do not consent to being recorded or questioned. No one is questioning you, Nathan said. You are free to leave. Richard looked toward the unlocked door. He did not move. Neither did anyone else. Perhaps each of them feared what might be said in their absence. Perhaps they still believed they could explain everything if they heard the evidence first. The projector cast a pale rectangle onto the wall above Dad's empty chair. Then his face appeared. The recording had been made in his study. He wore the brown cardigan I had often helped him button. His shoulders looked smaller than I remembered, but his eyes were steady. For one terrible second, I forgot to breathe. Evelyn, he began. If Nathan is showing you this, then I did not live long enough to finish what I started. I covered my mouth. Mark lowered his head. Dad continued. I began reviewing the accounts. After Maria Lewis showed me 2 invoices for the same roof repair. One was authentic. The other was inflated by more than $100,000. Rebecca distributed copies of the invoices while the video played. Dad explained that he first suspected poor bookkeeping. Then he found similar patterns in plumbing, landscaping, consulting, and property assessment expenses. The money did not disappear randomly. He said, it traveled through companies connected to people I trusted. Richard spoke toward the screen. You were confused. Dad's recorded voice continued as though answering him. Richard will say I misunderstood modern accounting. He has used my age to dismiss questions he did not want to answer. Richard's face tightened. Dad displayed a document on camera. It was the registration history for Blue Heron Holdings. The company had been created through a Delaware registered agent. At first, the records named no individual owners. But Rebecca had traced its bank authorization documents, tax filings, and a private operating agreement. She placed that agreement on the table. Blue Heron Holdings had 2 controlling members. Richard Carter owned 55%. Claire Carter owned 45%. Mark turned toward his wife. You told me Richard owned it. Claire did not look at him. You knew I had an interest? You said you were advising him. I was. You own almost half the company. Richard interrupted. This structure was created for future development opportunities. There is nothing illegal about it. Rebecca replied. There is when a lodge officer directs money to a company he secretly owns without disclosure, especially for services that were never performed. Dad's voice continued. Richard approved payments to his own company. Claire created consulting agreements after some payments had already been made. They used lodge funds to finance the process of selling the lodge. Linda stared at Claire. You said the consulting company belonged to investors. It has investors, Claire said. You are the investors. Claire's patience broke. We created a vehicle for the transaction. That is common in real estate, not when the seller pays the buyer's secret middleman, Rebecca said. Dad then explained the planned sale. Harlow Development would buy Carter Ridge for $12.8 million. That sounded generous until the full arrangement was considered. Blue Heron had negotiated a separate development and acquisition fee. Once the land was transferred and rezoned, Blue Heron would receive more than $2 million from the buyer. Richard and Claire would divide that fee. The family would never see it. Worse, Carter Ridge had been presented as a failing business to justify the sale price. Richard had postponed profitable events, rejected group bookings, delayed repairs, and moved legitimate revenue into later reporting periods. He had not merely stolen from the lodge, he had weakened it deliberately. You lowered the income, Linda asked. Richard stared at the screen. It needed to appear realistic to investors. It needed to appear worthless, I said. He turned toward me. The property is worth more as development land. I was unlocking value for yourself, for the family. Rebecca slid another document toward him. This agreement pays Blue Heron before any family distribution. Richard did not touch it. The video shifted to Mark. Dad looked tired as he spoke my son's name. Mark was offered the brokerage commission on the sale, approximately $380,000. Blue Heron also agreed to satisfy part of his private debt if he obtained Evelyn's cooperation. I looked at Mark. His eyes were wet. Is that true? He nodded once. Claire answered for him. We were trying to prevent foreclosure. You promised my son relief, using money taken from my parents' property. I gave him an opportunity to solve his own problem. You gave him a reason to betray me. Mark flinched. Dad explained that Mark had provided market information communicated with Harlow and helped prepare documents that would give him authority over any interest I received. He may tell himself he did not understand every detail Dad said, but he knew Evelyn was not being told the truth. I remembered the lemon cake on my table, the flowers in the sink, the form titled Temporary Property Maintenance Authorization. Did you know, I asked Mark, when you asked me to sign, did you know you could sell in my name? I knew it gave me authority. That is not what I asked. He wiped his face. Yes. The answer was barely audible. Did you know I could lose Carter Ridge? I thought you would receive money? Did you know I might lose my home? He looked at me, and for the first time there was no defense left in his expression. Yes. The words seemed to travel through my body without finding a place to stop. I had expected it. The documents had already told me, but Nathan had been right. Hearing the truth in Mark's own voice was different. It destroyed the last excuse I had been protecting. Dad turned next to Linda. Linda did not create the plan, but she knew a sale was being arranged without Evelyn's informed consent. Linda began crying before the recording finished. She was promised a condominium near her daughter and payment of several personal debts, Dad said. In exchange, she agreed to support Richard's claim that Evelyn was emotionally unstable. I looked at my sister. You told people I was losing my mind for an apartment? I did not think it would go this far. You signed a statement. Richard said it was only to encourage an evaluation. You humiliated me at church. I was afraid I would be left with nothing. You were left $75,000. It was not enough to change my life. The selfishness of that answer silenced even Richard. On the screen, Dad took a slow breath. I have made mistakes with all my children, he said. I allowed Richard to believe business skill excused dishonesty. I protected Linda from consequences. I praised Evelyn's strength so often that I forgot strong people also need protection. Tears ran down my face, and I did not speak plainly enough to Mark about gratitude. A man who sees family only as a solution to his debt will eventually turn love into a transaction. Mark covered his face. The recording ended with Dad addressing me directly. Evelyn, the choice of what happens next belongs to you. You may transfer this evidence to the authorities. You may pursue every dollar. You may preserve Carter Ridge or change it. Do not let anyone tell you that mercy requires silence. Mercy without truth is only permission. The screen went dark. For several seconds, the only sound was Linda crying. Then everything fractured. Claire stood and pointed at Richard. You told me Walter could not trace Blue Heron. Richard rose too. You handled the registration because you said Nathan would never examine the operating agreements. Mark looked at Claire. You used our house as leverage. I was trying to save it. You lied about your ownership. You were happy to accept the commission. I did not know you were taking millions. Claire laughed bitterly. So, the amount is your moral boundary. Linda turned on Richard. You promised no one would face charges. I promised the transaction would protect everyone if Evelyn cooperated. You promised me the condo. And you failed to control your sister. I sat listening as they blamed one another. The united family that had cornered me disappeared within minutes. Their loyalty had never been to one another. It had been to the outcome. Richard finally turned toward Nathan. This recording changes nothing. Walter was not medically competent. Nathan opened another folder. His physician evaluated him 2 days before the recording. He was fully oriented and legally competent. Claire's shoulders dropped. Rebecca gathered the documents. The audit materials will be submitted to the appropriate financial investigators. Civil recovery proceedings will begin immediately. Mark stood and came toward me. Mom? I raised one hand. Not yet. He stopped. There were 1,000 things I wanted to ask him. How long had he known? Which conversations had been real? Had he ever visited Dad without calculating what might be inherited? But the most painful question was the simplest. Did you ever think about what would happen to me after you got what you wanted? Mark opened his mouth. No answer came. I nodded slowly. That is what I thought. He began to cry. I did not comfort him. For the first time in his life, I allowed my son to remain inside the pain created by his own choices. Nathan asked whether I wanted the local authorities contacted that night. I looked at Dad's empty chair, then at the contract and the evidence covering the table. No one is leaving with records, I said. But I do not want a spectacle in this house. Richard gave a bitter smile, still protecting the family image. No, I said, protecting Dad's employees and guests from your chaos. I turned to Nathan. File what must be filed in the morning. Then I picked up the sale contract, tore the signature page in half, and placed both pieces before Richard. The lodge is not for sale. That was the moment the plan ended, but the consequences had only begun. By Monday morning, the accounts connected to Blue Heron Holdings had been frozen. Nathan filed an emergency civil action to prevent the transfer or destruction of funds. Rebecca submitted her audit materials to state financial investigators and the district attorney's office. Harlow Development withdrew from the transaction as soon as its attorneys learned that Richard and Claire had never controlled the property they promised to sell. Carter Ridge remained standing, but my family did not. Richard hired an aggressive defense attorney from Charlotte. Through that lawyer, he denied stealing anything and claimed every payment had been a legitimate business expense. He called Dad's investigation the product of family resentment and described me as an inexperienced trustee manipulated by Nathan. Claire hired separate counsel within 48 hours. That told me more than any public statement. She began cooperating selectively, providing emails that made Richard appear responsible for the false invoices while minimizing her own role. Richard responded by producing messages showing that Claire had negotiated Blue Heron's fee and drafted the documents meant to transfer my authority to Mark. Their partnership collapsed because it had never been built on trust. Linda went to Nathan's office with 3 boxes of printed emails and bank statements. She cried throughout the meeting. I did not take money from the lodge, she kept saying. You participated in the attempt to remove Evelyn's authority, Nathan replied. I was misled. You signed statements about her mental health. Richard wrote them. You signed them. Linda offered to return a $15,000 advance Blue Heron had paid toward the promised condominium. She also agreed to provide a complete account of the family meetings she had attended. Her cooperation might reduce her legal exposure. It did not erase what she had done to me. Mark came to my house 4 days after the dinner. I saw his car through the window, but did not open the door immediately. When I finally did, he looked older. Claire was not with him. Can I come in for 10 minutes? He entered without arguing. The flowers from his previous visit had wilted in the vase. He noticed them and looked away. Claire took the children to her sister's house, he said. I'm sorry they are frightened. She says we need distance. Perhaps you do. He sat at the same dining table where he had placed the authorization form. I have an attorney, you should. He says if I cooperate, explain what I knew, and return any money connected to the proposed commission, I may avoid the worst consequences. Have you told him everything? Yes, everything, Mark. His eyes met mine. This time, yes. I waited. He rubbed his hands together. Mom, I need to ask you something. There was a time when those words would have made me offer help before hearing the request. Not anymore. What do you have to pursue charges against me? I felt my chest tighten. The investigators decide what laws were broken. But you can tell them you do not want me prosecuted. You want me to conceal what you did. No, I will admit it. I will repay everything. I will surrender my commission claim. You never had a lawful commission claim? His face flushed. I know. He leaned forward. Caleb and Lily could lose their home. Their parents could both be charged. Please think about them. There it was again. The children, the house, the family. Always another person's pain placed before me as a reason to absorb the consequences. I have thought about them every day, I said. Did you think about them when you signed false representations? I thought I was saving their home. Did you think about them when you tried to have your mother declared incompetent? His eyes filled. I did not believe Richard would actually do it. You sat at the table while he locked the door. I was scared. So was I. He lowered his head. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I said, I will not exaggerate your role. I will not demand punishment because I am angry, but I will not lie, hide evidence, or ask anyone to ignore what you knowingly did. His shoulders sagged. You are choosing the lodge over me. No, Mark. I am choosing truth over protecting you from yourself. You are my mother. Yes. Doesn't that matter? It matters enough that I will not help you become the kind of man who believes love means never facing consequences. He began crying quietly. It hurt to watch. Every instinct in me wanted to move beside him, place my arms around his shoulders, and promise everything would be all right. I kept my hands in my lap. After a while, he spoke. I hated Grandpa for needing you. The confession surprised me. What? When you moved to the lodge, you said it was temporary. Then every time I asked you to come home, there was another appointment. Another bad week, another reason he could not be alone. You were an adult. I know, but you felt abandoned. He nodded. I would call, and you sounded tired. I stopped telling you about problems because you already had too much. Then when I did ask for help, you told me to be responsible. I did not know how serious your finances were. I was ashamed. Shame does not explain what you did. No, but resentment made it easier. He looked at me. Richard said Grandpa had used you your whole life. Claire said the lodge owed our family something because you gave up so much. They made the sale sound like repayment, and you believed taking my authority was a way to repay me. I believed you would be angry then, forgive me once you had money. The honesty was brutal. You assumed my forgiveness before betraying me. Yes, I looked toward the old photographs on the shelf. One showed Mark at 10 years old, grinning beside a birthday cake. I remembered how fiercely I had loved that child. I still loved the man before me. That was the tragedy. Mark, I should have told you how exhausted I was while caring for Dad, I said. I should not have pretended I could carry everything without cost. Perhaps my silence made you believe I did not need anyone. He wiped his eyes. I should have come. Yes, I should have helped. Yes, I blamed you because it was easier than admitting I stayed away. I nodded. Understanding his hurt did not excuse his actions, but it helped me see the path that had led him there. He had felt neglected, then ashamed, then desperate. Richard and Claire had taken those feelings and built a justification around them. Still, Mark had walked that path willingly. I do not know whether I can trust you again, I said. I understand. No, I do not think you do. Trust is not restored because the lie has been exposed. It is restored through what you do when no one is forcing you. What do you want me to do? Tell the complete truth. Return what you can. Protect your children from the details without teaching them that consequences are cruelty. And stop asking me to rescue you. He nodded slowly. I will. Do not promise me. He looked confused. Show me. When his 10 minutes ended, I walked him to the door. He paused on the porch. Do you still love me? The question nearly broke me. Yes, I said. But love is not the same as permission. He closed his eyes. Then he left. That night, I sat alone at Carter Ridge beside Dad's fireplace. The lodge was safe. The transaction was dead. The evidence was in the hands of professionals. I had won according to Nathan. But victory did not feel like happiness. It felt like surviving a fire and standing in the ashes, grateful to be alive while mourning everything that could not be restored. Several weeks after the investigation began, Nathan asked me to return to his office. Richard and Claire were still fighting through their attorneys. Linda had formally agreed to cooperate. Mark had given investigators access to his emails and surrendered his expected commission agreement. I assumed Nathan wanted another signature. Instead, he placed Mother's old leather case on the conference table. "There is one document Walter instructed me not to use in the legal proceedings," he said. "Why? Because it concerns your future, not their misconduct." He handed me a sealed folder. Inside was a letter from Dad and a detailed proposal for Carter Ridge Lodge. The first page was titled, "The Margaret House Plan." I looked up. What is this Walter's preferred use for the trust after his death? I began reading. Dad did not want Carter Ridge sold. He knew the property needed repairs and new leadership, but he believed its future should honor the sacrifices that had kept it alive. Mother's inheritance had saved the lodge. My years of care had preserved his final season of life. He wanted the lodge to serve people whose sacrifices were often invisible. The plan proposed converting part of Carter Ridge into a nonprofit retreat center for older caregivers, widows, and women rebuilding their lives after loss. Guests could stay for several days without charge or at a reduced cost. They would receive rest counseling resources, financial education, and help locating community services. The lodge would still accept paying guests and host events. Revenue would support the program. Dad had included a budget. The trust held reserve funds I had not known existed. Combined with insurance proceeds and recovered assets, there would be enough to renovate the lodge without selling the land. Nathan pointed to another section. "You have the right to live at Carter Ridge for the rest of your life." I continued reading. Dad had named me permanent director if I wanted the position. If I declined, I could appoint a qualified manager and remain trustee. Then I reached his personal letter. "Evelyn," he wrote, "I leaned on your strength until I forgot that strength can become a cage. You stayed because you loved me. I accepted because I was afraid of being alone. I should have told the others to carry their share, and I should have told you to go home sometimes." I pressed the paper against the table to steady it. "I thanked you for meals, medicine, and appointments, but not for the years of your life. I'm sorry." I covered my eyes. For 3 years, I had told myself I needed no gratitude. Care was simply what daughters did. But Dad's words reached a place inside me that had remained tired even after his death. The letter continued. "Carter Ridge is not payment for your sacrifice. No property could repay time. I leave you the choice because choice is what you surrendered most often." Nathan waited quietly. Dad wrote that I could sell my personal minority interests if I wished, but he hoped I would consider the retreat plan. "Build something that belongs to your future," he wrote. "Do not spend the rest of your life guarding my past." I read the proposal 3 times. For weeks, Carter Ridge had felt like a battlefield. Every room reminded me of accusations, hidden papers, and the night my family cornered me. Dad was asking me to see it differently, not as an inheritance, as an opportunity. I met with Susan, Maria, and Henry the following day. Richard had fired Maria and Henry, but as trustee, I restored their positions immediately. Susan remained the acting general manager. We sat in the lodge kitchen with coffee and discussed the plan. Maria cried when I described the free retreats for caregivers. "My mother cared for my grandmother for 6 years," she said. "No one ever asked whether she needed rest." Henry nodded. "My wife looked after her sister through cancer. After the funeral, everyone returned to normal, except her." Susan studied the budget. "This could work. We would need grants, partnerships, and a strong director." They all looked at me. "I have never operated a lodge," I said. "You have managed crises, families, and exhausted people for most of your career," Susan replied. "The hotel part can be taught." For the first time since Dad died, I felt excitement rather than fear when thinking about Carter Ridge. I agreed to move forward. I changed one detail. Dad had called the program Margaret House Retreats, but I wanted Mother's name attached to the entire center. Carter Ridge Lodge would become Margaret House at Carter Ridge. The commercial lodge would remain part of it, but the mission would be visible in every room. Linda asked to meet with me after hearing about the plan. She arrived without jewelry or dramatic tears. She carried a cashier's check, returning the $15,000 advance from Blue Heron. "I know this does not fix anything," she said. "It does not. I want to testify truthfully." "You should. I also want to apologize." I waited. She admitted that she had resented me for years. Every time Dad praised my care, she heard an accusation. When Richard offered her the condominium, she told herself she deserved it because I would receive the lodge. I wanted the benefit without carrying any responsibility, she said. "Yes, I do not expect you to forgive me. That is good, because I am not ready." She nodded and left the check on the table. Mark began selling assets to address his debts. He sold the restored truck Dad had left him, despite how much he had wanted it. He sold a small investment property and withdrew from his real estate partnership. His attorney established a repayment plan for any money connected to the proposed transaction. Claire was furious. She and Mark separated. I did not celebrate their marriage ending. Whatever Claire had done, my grandchildren were losing the structure of their home. But Mark told me the separation forced him to stop hiding behind her ambition. He began counseling. He did not ask me to pay for it. He sent updates through Nathan, rather than pressuring me to respond. When he wrote to apologize, he did not ask for forgiveness. He listed what he had admitted, what he was returning, and what he planned to change. For the first time, his actions did not require me to rescue him. Renovations at Carter Ridge began that summer. We restored the North Meadow instead of developing it. Henry rebuilt the walking paths. Susan contacted caregiver organizations across North Carolina. Maria created transparent accounting systems that required multiple approvals for major payments. No single person would ever again control the lodge's money in secret. One evening after the workers had gone, I sat on the porch overlooking the mountains. The sunset turned the sky rose and gold. For years, I had believed my life's most important chapters were behind me. I was a retired counselor, a divorced mother, a caregiver, and now an orphan. But Dad's final plan was not asking me to preserve an ending. It was offering me a beginning. I held his letter against my chest. "I wish you could see it," I whispered. Then I remembered his words, "Build something that belongs to your future." For the first time, Carter Ridge no longer felt like the place where my family had betrayed me. It felt like the place where I was learning to choose myself. 1 year after the dinner that nearly destroyed my family, I sat at the same oak table beneath a banner that read, "Welcome to Margaret House at Carter Ridge." The room had changed shade. The dark curtains were replaced with lighter fabric, allowing the mountain sun to fill the space. Fresh flowers stood where Richard's legal folders had once been stacked. The locked dining room doors remained open. I insisted on that. More than 100 guests attended the opening ceremony. Former lodge employees returned with their families. Representatives from caregiver organizations came from Asheville, Charlotte, and smaller towns across western North Carolina. Several women who had participated in our first trial retreat sat near the front. One was a 72-year-old widow named Donna, who had cared for her husband through dementia for 9 years. Another was a 64-year-old woman named Patricia, who had raised her grandchildren while caring for her mother. They told me Margaret House was the first place anyone had asked them one simple question. "What do you need?" That question became the heart of our work. Paying guests still stayed at Carter Ridge. Weddings were held in the garden, families rented cabins in autumn, and travelers gathered beside the fireplace during winter. But a portion of every booking supported retreat programs. Caregivers stayed without charge. Widows attended financial workshops. Women who had spent decades serving others were given quiet rooms, warm meals, counseling, and permission to rest without apology. Dad's lodge had become Mother's legacy. Richard did not attend the opening. The civil case against him was still active, and the financial investigation had not fully concluded. Several $100,000 had been recovered from Blue Heron's accounts and applied toward Carter Ridge's losses. Through his attorney, Richard continued to claim that his decisions had been aggressive business strategy rather than theft. I no longer needed to argue with him. The records would speak. Claire also stayed away. She and Mark had legally separated. Her attorneys negotiated her cooperation in exchange for consideration of her assistance in recovering funds. She retained visitation with the children, but the confidence she once displayed had been replaced by caution. I did not hate her. Hatred would have required carrying her with me every day. I chose boundaries instead. Linda arrived early. She had been volunteering at Margaret House twice a month, mostly helping prepare guest rooms and coordinating donated clothing. She never handled money contracts or private records. Those were boundaries I established. At first, she tried to prove herself through constant apologies. I eventually told her that repeating regret placed the burden back on me. Do the work I said. Let time decide what it means. So she did. That morning, she arranged flowers in the dining room and left before the ceremony began because she knew I was not ready to present us publicly as fully reconciled sisters. Her willingness to respect that boundary meant more than another apology. Mark sat in the last row. He had asked whether he should attend. I told him the opening was public and that he could come as long as he expected nothing from me. He arrived alone, dressed simply, and took a seat far from the family table. Over the past year, he had continued therapy and financial counseling. He sold his share in his real estate business and accepted a salaried position with a property management company. It paid less, but the work was steady. He made monthly restitution payments. Sometimes the amount was small. He never missed one. He called me every Sunday evening. If I did not answer, he left a brief message and did not call repeatedly. He visited the children on schedule, admitted to them that he had made serious financial and ethical mistakes, and refused to blame Claire or Richard for his choices. Trust had not returned suddenly. It returned in fragments. A truthful answer, a promise kept. A month without manipulation. An apology that asked for nothing. Those fragments were not yet a whole bridge between us, but they were enough to show me he was building. After the opening speeches, I invited several people to join me at Dad's dining table. Susan sat on my right. Maria and Henry sat across from us. Donna and Patricia joined the group. Nathan sat near Dad's old chair but refused to take it. That belongs to the person who saved the lodge, he said. I shook my head. No one person saved it. I left Dad's chair empty. Not because I could not let him go, but because some absences deserve acknowledgement. I had brought his final letter with me. The original was now protected in the trust archive, but I held a copy. I want to read one final passage, I told the room. The guests became quiet. I unfolded the paper. Dad's words were written beneath the sections describing the audit, the trust, and the instructions for confronting my family. I had not read this paragraph aloud during the terrible dinner. At the time, there had been too much anger in the room to understand it. I began, Evelyn, you have spent your life believing that the loudest person holds the most power, Richard demanded. Linda complained. Others took what your silence allowed them to take. I paused and looked toward the open doors. You were never the weakest person in this family. You were only the one who did not need to hurt anyone to prove you were strong. My voice broke. Susan reached beneath the table and squeezed my hand. I finished the passage. Strength is not measured by what you can endure for others. Sometimes it is measured by what you finally refuse to endure. The room remained silent for a moment. Then people stood and applauded. I did not feel triumphant. I felt seen. After the ceremony, guests moved onto the porch for lunch. I remained inside, gathering my papers. Mark approached slowly. May I speak to you? Yes. He stopped on the other side of the table. I liked what Grandpa wrote. So did I. He looked at the chair where Richard had sat during the confrontation. I keep thinking about that night. I do too. I thought you were the only person standing between me and safety. And now I know my choices were standing between me and safety. The answer was not polished. That made me believe it. He continued, I am not asking you to forgive me today. I know. I wanted to thank you. For what? For not helping me hide. I looked at him carefully. At first, I thought you were destroying my life. But if you had protected me, I would have blamed everyone else forever. His eyes filled. You did not let me stay the worst version of myself. The old mother inside me wanted to reach across the table. This time, I allowed myself. I took his hand. It was not complete forgiveness. It was not restored trust. It was a beginning. I love you, I said. I love you too. But we continue slowly. Yes. And honestly, yes. Outside, children ran across the lawn. Music drifted from the porch. The north meadow moved gently beneath the summer wind, untouched by condominiums, fences, or construction roads. Mark and I walked outside together. Not side by side as though nothing had happened, not far apart as enemies. Simply two people learning whether a damaged relationship could become something truthful. That evening, after the guests left, I returned to the dining room alone. Sunset light stretched across the table. I remembered Richard locking the door, Linda questioning my mind, Claire pushing the contract toward me, Mark asking me to sacrifice myself so he would not have to face his mistakes. The memory still hurt. Healing had not erased it. Healing did not mean pretending the betrayal had been smaller than it was. It did not mean returning everyone to their former place in my life. It meant the betrayal no longer controlled the future. I opened both dining room doors and left them that way. Then I walked onto the porch of Margaret House and looked toward the mountains. For the first time in many years, I was not waiting for someone to need me. I was choosing where my life would go next. For most of my life, I believed loving my family meant being the person who absorbed the pain. I stayed quiet to prevent arguments. I forgave before anyone changed. I gave my time, money, and strength because I thought a good mother, daughter, and sister should never be the reason a family fell apart. But I learned that silence does not always preserve a family. Sometimes it only protects the people who are harming it. Age does not make a person weak. Grief does not make someone incapable. Speaking softly does not mean having nothing powerful to say. The people at that dinner saw my patience and assumed it was surrender. They mistook kindness for permission. They were wrong. I also learned that forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. Forgiveness can release anger from your heart. Reconciliation requires truth, responsibility, boundaries, and consistent change. Mark was still my son after he betrayed me. I still loved him. But loving him did not require me to lie for him, rescue him, or trust him before he earned it. Real love does not remove every consequence. Sometimes real love allows consequences to teach what our words could not. My father's greatest gift was not the lodge or the trust. It was the truth he left behind, the truth that I had value even when I was not sacrificing myself for someone else. Perhaps that is the message I most want to share with you. You're allowed to ask questions. You are allowed to read the document before signing. You're allowed to say no to people you love. You are allowed to protect the life you spent decades building. And you are allowed to begin again no matter your age. What would you have done if you had been sitting in my chair that night? Could you forgive Mark, Linda, or the others? Tell me honestly in the comments. I would also love to know where you are watching from and what time it is there. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who may need its message, and subscribe for more stories about courage, family justice, and second chances. Your voice matters, your boundaries matter, and your next chapter may be closer than you think.